I remember that Valentine's night vividly. Ron had planned a quiet dinner at home, sweet, thoughtful, and so utterly Ron. The candles flickered on the table, their soft glow warming the small dining room. A bottle of wine sat uncorked between us, its rich aroma mingling with the faint scent of his cologne. Had gone out of his way to cook my favorite dish, lasagna, despite knowing he wasn't much of a cook. It was endearing, thoughtful in a way that should have touched me deeply. And yet, I couldn't stop comparing it to Mark. Mark, with his grand gestures and elaborate surprises, had always left me breathless. Valentine's with him had meant luxury, a surprise weekend getaway, a 5-course dinner at a restaurant overlooking the city, or a handwritten note hidden in the pocket of my coat, discovered only when I was miles away. Mark had a way of making me feel like the only person in the world. Ron's effort was kind, but as I sat there smiling at him, a strange emptiness gnawed at me. I told myself to stop. Ron was here with me, trying. But before I could push the thought away, Mark's name slipped out. Ron's face changed immediately. Not anger. Not exactly. It was something sharper, more visceral. Hurt. The kind of pain you feel when you realize you're competing with a ghost. He brushed it off with a strained smile, his fingers gripping the edge of the table a little tighter than before. "It's okay," he said softly, but the damage was done. I told myself it was nothing, that everyone slips up. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the name that lingered between us. It was everything, the memories of Mark, the comparisons, the unspoken doubts. Ron deserved better than to live in someone else's shadow, and I knew that. But knowing didn't make it easier. She walked into the room like a lightning storm, sharp, bright, and impossible to ignore. It was a Saturday night, and I was at a friend's party, standing off to the side, pretending to care about some guy droning on about his new startup. I nursed my drink, half listening, when she appeared. Alice. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she had a presence that pulled you in. There was a quiet confidence about her, a spark that made you forget everyone else. Her laughter carried over the music, light and unforced, like she didn't care who was listening. Our mutual friend, Tom, introduced us. "Alice, meet Jake." Jake, Alice. That was it. No fireworks, no romantic music swelling in the background. Just a simple introduction. But within minutes, I was hooked. Alice had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room without even trying. We hit it off immediately, jumping from travel stories to our shared love of classic movies. The big connection, though? Trivia nights. We both had this ridiculous obsession with cramming useless knowledge into our heads. That night, we ended up tucked into a corner, talking for hours. Her laugh, it was quick, contagious, the kind that made you want to keep cracking jokes just to hear it again. I teased her about her love for pineapple on pizza, fully expecting the usual debate. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, smirked, and said, "You're lucky I'm feeling generous tonight." In that moment, I knew I was in serious trouble. The early days with Alice felt like magic. Weekend road trips, late night talks, inside jokes, only we understood. I remember one weekend in particular. We decided, on a whim, to drive to a beach town. No plans, no reservations, just her playlist blasting and me confidently getting us hopelessly lost. We ended up miles off course, starving, and stumbled upon a diner with a neon sign proclaiming, "The best pancakes in the state." Spoiler alert, they weren't. The pancakes were rubbery, the syrup suspiciously watery. But Alice didn't care. Sitting across from me, syrup dripping down her chin, she grinned and said, "This is perfect." And somehow, it was. Cooking together was another adventure. Like the time we tried making homemade sushi. The rice turned into glue, and our rolls looked like science experiments gone wrong. Instead of getting frustrated, we ended up on the kitchen floor, laughing until our sides hurt. That was Alice. She had this incredible ability to spin life's little disasters into golden memories. But it wasn't just the fun. Late at night, curled up on the couch, we'd dive into deep conversations. She told me about her childhood, growing up with distant parents, her obsession with survival shows, her wild dream of visiting every continent. And she listened to me too, my fears, my messy thoughts, the things I never shared with anyone else. For the first time, someone got me. Alice and I were different though. She was a planner with color-coded calendars and to-do lists. I winged it, always had. She'd joke about my inability to plan past tomorrow, and I'd tease her about needing an itinerary for everything, even grocery shopping. I thought it worked. Her structure grounded me. My spontaneity added unpredictability to her life. It felt like balance. I loved her quirks. The way she hummed under her breath while folding laundry, the sticky notes she left around the apartment with reminders and little affirmations like, "You've got this." I even found one tucked into my laptop case once and kept it. But I ignored the cracks. Every now and then, she'd mention her ex, not in a lingering way, but in passing. "Mark loved this place." Or, "Mark and I tried kayaking once. It was a disaster." I told myself it didn't matter. Everyone has a past, right? She was here with me. That's what counted. Still, his name stuck in my head longer than I wanted. One night, we were walking back from dinner. The air was cool, the city alive with its usual buzz. She slipped her hand into mine, her grip warm and steady. "Jake," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Do you ever think about the future?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. "Of course," I said, squeezing her hand. "You're my future, Alice." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Months later, I found myself replaying that moment over and over. The subtle shift in her expression, the way she seemed to hesitate, just for a second, before squeezing my hand back. I tried to ignore the doubts, but they lingered, whispering in the quiet moments. And then came the Valentine's night. Ron had planned a quiet dinner at home. Sweet, thoughtful, and exactly his style. But as I sat there, watching the candles flicker, Mark's name slipped out. The look on Ron's face was devastating. And in that moment, I realized something he'd been avoiding for far too long. I was still holding on to a ghost. It wasn't just unfair to Ron, it was unfair to myself. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what was, or what could have been. It was time to let go. Because love, real love, isn't about grand gestures or perfect plans. It's about showing up, even when things are messy. It's about choosing the person in front of you every single day. And for the first time in years, I was ready to do that. Looking back, I can see now how the good times blinded me. I was too swept up in the laughter, the adventures, and the moments of pure connection to notice the warning signs that were quietly building beneath the surface. At the time, I convinced myself that our differences were complementary, that they made us stronger, more balanced. But in hindsight, some of those differences weren't the kind that fit together like puzzle pieces. They were jagged edges we forced to align, even when they didn't quite match. But back then, I was all in. No hesitation, no doubts. The changes were so gradual that I didn't see them coming. They began with small things, the kind of quirks and habits you brush off in the name of love. Her frustration when I forgot plans, my irritation when she triple-checked every detail, even the inconsequential ones. What started as minor annoyances turned into silences. At first, I told myself they were just the comfortable kind that come with familiarity. But eventually, they felt different, heavy, loaded, almost suffocating. It was like standing on the edge of a fault line, knowing it would crack wide open, but not knowing when. Then came the night she asked me a question that shifted everything. Do you think we're too different? It wasn't the question itself that left me frozen. It was how she asked it. Her tone was soft, almost tentative, but her eyes gave her away. It wasn't a question at all. It was a statement she was too afraid to make. She already knew the answer. She just wanted me to say it first. I fumbled through a response, reaching for anything that would reassure her, and maybe myself too. No, I think our differences make us stronger. We balance each other out. The words felt hollow even as I said them. She nodded, but the distance in her gaze didn't change. If anything, it deepened. That was the first time I felt the shadow of Mark. At first, it was subtle. His name would pop up in conversation every now and then, a passing mention, a casual remark. I didn't think much of it at first. But as time went on, it started to feel different. Every time she said his name, it was like a stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still part of her life, even if only in her mind. Was I just a placeholder, filling the space he had left behind? I wanted to ignore it, to chalk it up to my own insecurities. But the doubts had a way of creeping in, growing louder with every passing day. I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid or accusatory, so I kept it to myself. I tried to pretend it wasn't eating away at me, even as it gnawed at the edges of my confidence. Then came the night everything came to a head. We were cleaning up after dinner, and the conversation had been light, almost pleasant. It felt like a rare moment of normalcy, a glimpse of how things used to be. But then, out of nowhere, she said it. Mark Woodvey loved this recipe. The plate I was holding slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. The sound was loud, jarring, and it broke more than just ceramic. She froze, her wide-eyed expression a mixture of shock and guilt. I didn't need her to explain. The line had been crossed, and we both knew it. I didn't mean. She started, but I cut her off before she could finish. Do you even hear yourself? I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. It's like he's always here. In our conversations, in your head. Is there even room for me? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before, doubt. She looked away, and in that silence, something shifted between us. It wasn't just the tension or the pain. It was the realization that we were both holding on to something that was slipping through our fingers, no matter how tightly we tried to grip it. We didn't talk about it again, but the air between us grew heavier with each passing day. The connection we once had, the ease, the comfort, the spark, felt strained, like a rope pulled too tight, fraying at the edges. We tried to push forward, to salvage what we could, but it felt like trying to cup water in our hands. No matter how hard we tried, it kept slipping away. The breaking point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. We were sitting on the couch, flipping through photos from a trip we'd taken together. It was one of those moments where nostalgia tugs at your heart. reminding you of what you're trying so desperately to hold on to. She paused on a photo of us at the beach, smiling and carefree. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Alice, the one I fell in love with. "You look so much like him here," she said softly. My heart sank. I didn't need to ask who him was. I already knew. The shadow that had loomed over us for so long finally had a name. I stood up, unable to sit still. The weight of her words pressed down on me, suffocating. "I can't do this, Alice. I can't keep competing with a memory." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with tears. "I didn't mean it like that." "But you did," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "And that's the problem. He's not just in the past for you. He's here, in everything we do. And I can't be him. I don't want to be." We ended things that night. There was no shouting, no dramatic accusations. Just a quiet understanding that we couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. It was a mutual acknowledgement of the inevitable, painful, but necessary. Over the next few days, she packed her things. I helped her carry boxes to her car, both of us navigating the process in silence. The only words exchanged were practical: where this belonged, what she needed. As she left, I found one of her sticky notes on the kitchen counter. It read, "You've got this." I left it there for weeks, unable to throw it away. In the months that followed, I replayed everything in my mind. The good times, the bad, and all the moments in between. I thought about the night we met, the way her laugh had lit up the room and made me feel like the luckiest man alive. I thought about the road trips, the late night talks, and the plans we made for a future that no longer existed. And I thought about Mark, the shadow he cast over our relationship, the unspoken presence I could never compete with. Looking back now, I see things more clearly. Alice wasn't trying to hurt me. She wasn't malicious or unkind. She was just trying to move on, to build something new from the pieces of her shattered past. But the past has a way of clinging to you, no matter how hard you try to let it go. I don't blame her. In a strange way, I'm grateful for the time we shared. She taught me to find joy in chaos, to laugh at life's little disasters, to appreciate the beauty in fleeting moments. For a while, she made the world feel a little less lonely. Not every story is meant to last forever. Some are just chapters, brief but meaningful, leaving behind memories that linger like the scent of her favorite perfume. And that's okay. Because even though we didn't make it, I'll always be grateful for the love we shared, for the lessons we learned, and for the way she made me feel, if only for a little while, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.